All
All
right, let
right,
me
let's go.
uh, put up my totally professional TM slides.
All right, I'm gonna introduce you real quick. Wow, amazing. That's
Amazing.
amazing. All right, so welcome to GameSpawn's Tech Talk. We're going to invite in professionals from the game dev and game dev related industry to come speak on their experiences and provide practical advice to our student devs. So in today's talk, we have Diane Ngo speaking. She's GameSpawn Officer alumni and was president from 2019 to 2021 and is currently working as a graphics programmer for Proletariat Incorporated. So thanks for taking out the time to talk with us, Diane.
Yeah,
Woo!
thanks for having me. And we're recording, right? I'm ready.
Yep,
I'm
we
good to
are.
start.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to be super formal with this talk, as you can probably guess uh, by the title slide here. I would just be talking about a bit about myself, a bit about how GameSpawn got me to where I am, and a bit how I think GameSpawn can help you to get a job, and a bit of job advice too. Uh, so Lelia did already introduce me. But who am I? I work at Proletariat. I'm a graphics engineer. I am right here in this image. This is from Global Game Jam 2020, right before we all had
Yeah,
to
it
go
was in
into lockdown.
2020.
I am
It's yeah.
I may or may not be dead in this image. Uh, but it was a very fun time. Uh, let's see. I basically spent all 4 years. Yeah, 4 of my years in GameSpawn. I was event coordinator my second year, and then I was president my last 2 years. And then just a disclaimer, I'm under NDA for like 99% of the work I've done. So I can't really talk about anything I've done publicly, although I can speak to kind of general things about work or my feelings about certain things. Sorry this is disappointing if like can't talk about like cool thing that I worked on, but yeah, that's where I am. So this is Spellbreak. This is like my studio's main game. Fortunately, I joined way after it released. So pretend I worked on this because I can't show anything, but I actually worked on it. Spellbreak's kind of wizard battle royale type game. It's pretty cool. Uh, and my work is generally as a graphics engineer to work with artists. Basically, if they want to make effects like the one you see on screen, I work with them to figure out how we can put it into the game and so it doesn't melt people's computers, as well as making it so making stuff like this is an easy process both on the design side and on the artist side, so they're not painstakingly setting things up every time. Yeah, so fortunately, I can't talk a ton about the specifics of that. That's just how it is. As far as what I actually did in GameSpawn, my first year, I did kind of like a hack and slashy type game called Echo in the Mirror. Uh, that was, I think that was the first game I worked on. Um, and I did it with myself, some of my artist friends. Evie's actually like in the call right now. Uh, and a audio person. And it was fun, but also it was a lot of learning how to learn. Um, and one thing, like I know a lot of you have are on game teams right now, and I think one thing that I had to learn that I think a lot of you are probably in the process of learning or have already learned is that trying to learn how to work with a team alongside how to design a game, alongside just um, how should I say, like learning your actual craft. It's kind of you're learning a bunch of stuff at the same time, and it's a lot, even though like it might not seem like a lot. Y'all are doing great, and I think if you're in your first year and you make like a small thing or that doesn't turn out the way that you like it, because I go in the mirror, like I will be the first to admit that I did not I did not make it very bug free. I did not particularly design the code very well, but it was a very good learning experience. And I think that part is what's important when you're in GameSpot. And so the year after, I took a lot of the stuff I learned, and again, working with Evie, who was the team lead this time, instead of me being the team lead. Um, I made Ocean's Demise with her and the rest of the people on my team. And I basically served as like the lead programmer for that, where I was responsible for organizing all of the people's programming tasks and like uh, figuring out what needed to be done on the programming side. And I think that's another thing like on the programming side that they tend like you don't really learn in school where figuring out how to take like a big problem like making a game and then chopping it up and giving it to people to do, that's hard. On like I don't know, the enemies or work on making cutscenes or work on making this. Um, and then when you actually get into it, it's much more complicated than it is at first glance. And part of game dev is just managing that complexity and organizing everyone together. And then took kind of a break my junior year, working on some random other stuff. Then my final year, I worked on Codename Null. You might have seen it. You might have seen the channel. Kind of an action RPG or third-person action game. And the pitch for this, in Evie's words, was to make a game you could beat in 5 minutes to show off as much of our skills as possible. And I mean, I suppose it worked because I have a job. Uh, but it was our first game in Unreal. In GameSpawn, we tend to use Unity, but we spent a quarter basically getting everyone up to speed in Unreal. Um, I think giving people time, like budgeting time for people to learn stuff, um, is pretty important. Uh, which, like technically, uh, I had done that the first 2 games, but I think the third, like with Codename Null, was the first time we basically set aside time to be like, hey, this is new to us. We're gonna learn all of this. And because usually it's easy to say like, hey, I'm gonna finish this uh to tell someone like, hey, do this thing and do it in like a week or something. And it's hard to know how long something will take, especially if you're learning to do it for the first time. So yeah, uh that's the big projects I did at GameSpawn. A lot of the stuff I learned from that. And specifically as a programmer, I wanted to talk about some things that uh, were very valuable to learn and things that I don't think you would necessarily learn in a class that were very valuable to me in terms of just me as a programmer, but also uh, like developing my skills um, to get a job. And one of the first things there is GitHub and like a version control stuff in general, where in classes usually they make you do like even if you're in projects or something, they don't really enforce like a way to collaborate with other people. And if you're on a GameSpawn project, you've probably already had a programmer work with set up a GitHub and work with people with that. But I think it's just important to highlight that it's really important to know how to use something like that because I basically use it every day. Like I wake up in the morning, I grab files that other people have worked on, put it on my computer, I work for the day, and then when I finish something, I'll send it to everyone else. And knowing how to use a software like that uh, basically saves you a lot of pain in terms of having to learn it on the job later. And just in terms of like uh, making games for GameSpawn and working with other programmers. The other thing that I think is less utilized is making tools for other people. So this is kind of a screenshot of the cutscene system I made for Ocean's Demise. And I know a lot of times with when you're starting out um, and with how small the teams are in GameSpawn, there's a desire to just make a thing and make it work the one-off time. Like, hey, I'm gonna make a cutscene by like hard coding a bunch of animations and like having the characters move around like that. But a good portion of programming, at least on the professional side, is making things that other people will use. So say like I make this cutscene system and we're making like an RPG. Now, um, I as a programmer, I don't have to put everything in anymore. I can give it to maybe like a narrative designer or just like a random game designer. And I'm like, hey, go nuts with this. And they can adjust things to how they see fit and how their vision is. Um, and that's what, in the end, is your goal as a programmer a lot of the time is to empower your designer or your leader, whoever is putting the stuff in order to make the vision that they want. And a lot of it is um, learning what tools and things will be useful to designers. Um, but that's something that you can practice like as you get more experience. And Unity is really good for this because you can make a lot of tools in Unity. And then lastly, and this is like for me personally, like I learned a lot of graphic stuff. Uh, I basically took a lot of shader code I found on the internet, and then I slapped it into my projects and tinkered it to how I wanted to look. Um, and I feel like if I know not everyone's interested in graphics, but if you are interested in graphics, that's a pretty cool way to start where you can immediately go in and see like, hey, here's the visual effect I want. If I poke around with it, what visual effect comes out of that? Let's see. And then, yeah, that's like a few things that I specifically learned as a programmer, both that I would not have learned without GameSpawn because they would not teach me any of this in class. And then so as far as applying to jobs, because I basically spent my I applied to jobs like throughout the my school life, but I kind of went super hard on it like senior year. Uh, I know most people probably have a good idea to do this. Like there are game dev job sites out there where like I would go to like grackle.hq and I'd search up like, hey, their internships, and I could filter it by like programming or art or whatever. Or I could search for like entry level or associate jobs and do that. And one of the big things uh, that when you're starting out, I think it's pretty common to self-select yourself out of applying to things. Like take this um, posting, for example, where I like you can look at the description. I have scratched out the years of experience needed and like, oh, experience with this a plus because you just got out of college or you're gonna be going out of college. Like you're not gonna have that, but that's okay because they're not gonna expect you to. The general rule of thumb I've seen is if you meet like maybe half of the requirements or not even half the requirements. Like if you're applying to entry level stuff and you meet like 3 or 4 of the requirements, you're fine. You shouldn't let things like, oh, I don't have a year of professional experience technically, because, you know, my experience has been when you actually get there and talk to people, they're going to be like, okay, we're going to train you up. We're going to teach you how things work. Even though it's not an internship, even though technically they said that you would need professional experience, um, you honestly really don't, even if you're applying to actual full-time entry-level jobs. Uh, and like you can look at it and you can check off like, hey, here's all the stuff I've either got in classes or um, I have practiced by doing stuff in GameSpawn. Like, hey, I practiced my C++ and C sharp. Or hey, I practiced writing nice code through class and through GameSpawn. And I practiced my team skills because I've worked in teams in GameSpawn. Like you can look at all of those and think about your experience in GameSpawn and be like, I actually have all of these. I shouldn't let the, oh, I don't have a single year of experience drag it down from me applying to it. Granted, this is like with a very big programming focus, but I think the rule generally, the the concept generally applies through all the disciplines. Um, and yeah, and then the job process, it's I won't lie, it's kind of soul crushing at times. I spent a year, more than a year, applying for jobs. My senior year and after my senior year, and writing cover letters kind of sucks, but for whatever reason, uh, recruiters will tell you you still need to do it. So generally what I recommend there is you write kind of a broadly like applicable cover letter that's like, hey, I'm a programmer. I know this stuff in this field. And then you insert like a paragraph at the bottom or in the middle somewhere saying like, this is why I want to apply to your company in specific. And once you have that, you have your resume, you apply, and then that's it. Interviewing also kind of sucks, um, but you still need to do it because I won't lie, it very much interviewing is very much biased towards extroverted people, people that like are very comfortable with putting themselves out there. Uh, and I feel like a lot of people like us in GameSpawn are not that kind of person, which, you know, for better, for worse, that's who we are. And I think a big thing that I've realized, and part of it is just like getting myself out there doing a lot of interviews, is that at the end of the day, you're applying to game dev companies. And everyone else, like everyone you're going to be interviewing, also likes video games. So at the end of the day, you're going to have that common. You're going to have that common ground. So, you can always break the ice by being like, hey, what games have you played lately? Let's see, like, what's your favorite game, etc. That kind of deal. And at the end of the day, like everyone here, whether whether you're confident in yourself or not, you like video games and you want to make video games, so you can talk about that. One thing I will say that is not great is game dev like interview pipelines tend to be really long. Like I've had I've had like job pipelines where it was like a recruiter interview and then an interview with like a test and then an interview with a manager and then 4 hours of interviews with people from different teams. And granted, not all of those are in the same day, but it's just a lot of interviews and it's a lot of waiting and it kind of sucks waiting uh, between all of those things. Um, and it's easy for me to say like, oh, go play video games or something, or oh, just don't think about it. It's kind of hard, but once you put out enough applications, that's all you can do really. Um, and in the end, what they're looking for most of the time, once you get through like the skill check and the red flag checks of, are you a person that's going to be like a toxic asshole, or oh, do you actually know what you're doing? At the end of the day, these interviews are there for them to figure out, can you work in a team? Can you work with the culture of everyone that you're going to be working with? And it's not a perfect process, but I can understand why they do it because, as you can tell from your game spawn teams, the dynamic and your communication is so important that they're willing to spend like 4 or 5 hours and multiple people's time out of the day to come and talk to you and be like, hey, can you work well with our team? And can you just are you able to sit down and talk with them? And if you really needed to, could you go to them and be like, hey, I need help? Or hey, I don't know why this decision is being made. Or hey, I uh what's that? Like, hey, I would like to know more about what's happening. Like that kind of being able to talk with other people is so important, especially um, at a bigger studio. That's what they're gonna spend most of the time interviewing you for. And I think GameSpawn did help me a lot with that, where all of those 4 years, I spent time talking to other devs and talking to other people and figuring out how to communicate in the context of a game dev team. So, I think just by being here, by making games, you're learning skills in the background that you don't even think you're learning, but you are. But yeah, that's my spiel. I've kind of been talking at people for a while. Do people have questions?
Woo! If you guys have questions but don't want to like accidentally talk over anyone, you can also just use the raise hand thing. It will just call them out to you. Um,
Yeah.
Is there something that you learned for after working in games that you didn't realize from before you went into games? What new part of your brain evolved from working into game dev?
I will say, speaking as a programmer, One of the things that I learned is it's less about making like smart code, like, oh, I did this cool trick and it like makes it really fast, and more about writing code so that someone else, like even just some random dude that you've never met before, can look at your code and be like, okay, I know why they did it. And in that way, your code is less a measure of how smart you are and kind of a way of like measuring, can you design something that's readable to other people? Can you think about like, if someone's going to come here and read it like 3 years from now, will they understand why I did the things I did? Because I've worked with code that's like multiple years old, and I look at it and I go like, what? Why did you make this decision? This is dumb. And then I go talk to the person, and they're like, oh, it's like, oh, we were in a time crunch, or oh, we needed to ship this by this date, or we had a bunch of other constraints like visuals or other logic. Um, and a lot of that is kind of like empathy and coding in a way, just thinking about the constraints and the conditions people are in when they write code. That's kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
All right, I
Let's see.
have a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
never mind, I see one by Daphne. Daphne, would you like to ask your question, or would you like one of us to read it off?
I think Weston also asked one before her very quickly if we want to go over that.
Oh, I
And
see.
then, yeah.
All right, so Weston asked advice on hunting the game dev internship, hunting for game dev internships. I think that's a good one.
That's a hard question because on some level, like hunting for jobs is a number game. Like once you have the skills and like because it's an internship, the bar is lower. It's just gonna be about throwing, your application out there, putting yourself out there, but putting yourself out enough times that someone will look at it. Because I'm not gonna sugarcoat it because there's not really a good way to get your thing looked at other than uh like you have, how should I say? Because the way I see it, most people when they apply to internships, like they have the things that show that, okay, you're up to this kind of skill level in terms of stuff you've done or skills you have. And at that point, it's really just up to, maybe they have a weird filter, or maybe the recruiter is like, I don't know, under a time pressure and they're just picking out people randomly. And there's not really a good way, like a very defined way to do it. The biggest success I've seen maybe is like if you're able to tailor like your portfolio or your resume, your cover letter to what the studio has done. And this works better in some contexts than others. Like I'll bring up Yuval as an example where he had an Unreal game he did, and he applied to Epic because they make Unreal. And that's going to be something that will either be called out in the job description or something that you can kind of glean based off of the company that, hey, if they make this kind of thing, if you have also made this kind of thing, then you'll match up pretty well. And I've heard the same advice applied to art where, oh, they have this kind of art style. Make sure to include stuff from your portfolio that kind of matches the art style you're looking for. So yeah, I can't I can't really give you much more concrete advice than that, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it's kind of a numbers game. Though I will say, like, I didn't get an internship. So, if you don't get one, it's not the end of the world. You can still apply to regular entry-level jobs as well.
All right. So Daphne asked, is there anything else we should take advantage of or practice more of as we work in groups like these in GameSpawn that would benefit us in the workplace? And then followed up with any tips being a team lead.
I will say, like, you should definitely, like, I don't know if I would make like, I would say to focus on it because I think it just naturally comes out of working in a team. But one of the advantages you have in working in GameSpawn or like whatever context that has a team instead of you making games yourself is that communication aspect, that teamwork aspect that you wouldn't be able to learn otherwise, because when they're going to interview you, when they're going to talk to you, they're going to ask you questions like, oh, like some standard interview questions like, uh, name a time when you disagreed with someone, like on a game dev team, or how did you resolve conflicts on your game dev team, or work with other programmers and stuff like that. And part of it is just getting the experience of that. But also part of it is figuring out ways to communicate with people better, because it might seem obvious to you now, but sometimes like people have trouble asking for help, or sometimes it's good to give people heads up when you make like big decisions in terms of programming or art or whatever. And those might seem obvious, but you need to actually apply them in practice when you're on a team. And then any tips on being a team? I will always say that being a team lead is harder than it sounds, because if you think about it like a studio structure, as a team lead for something like a GameSpawn game, you're basically whatever role that you like want to do, so like programmer, artist, musician, whatever, writer. But also you're the producer, because you're structuring people's timelines and how the work is getting done and the schedules for that work. But also you're usually designing a good portion of the game. So you're kind of working like 3 roles at once. And my advice there, I feel, is to be conscious of that, because like uh, a lot of people, I think, start games as a team lead and they don't really think about all of the work other than, oh, I just do my own thing. Like, oh, I program, I do art, I do writing, whatever. And they don't really think about the other amount of work that goes into it. As far as specifically working with different work ethics, I think that's partially like a producer part where uh, it's going to be hard to judge if like, especially if you're new, you don't know the other people. But thinking about it in terms of, okay, I have this much like programmer person budget and this much art person budget or writer person budget, etc. And like, where none of us are getting paid to work on GameSpawn games. I don't know, maybe in the future that'll change if like GameSpawn gets 1 billion sponsorships and then we can fund individual teams or something. But at the end of the day, no one's getting paid to do this. So really, you just have to work with people's time budgets and their like energy budgets. And think about, okay, like I don't have that many programmers. I have to scale down my scope for the art or my program or my writing or whatever. So yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
So I have a question that I don't know exactly how this would go, but basically, what would you say the work-life balance is like working full-time for a professional job, especially game dev, because that's pretty unique.
See, that's a hard question because like I can speak to my experience, but my experience is not going to be anybody else's experience. And I know a lot of studios can come out and say like, oh, we're against crunch. And the problem there, I feel, is crunch means different things to different studios and people. Because some people can be like, oh, on one end, it could be like, oh, you shut down your computer by 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever, and you don't touch the game dev again that day. And some people's idea of not crunch is like, what's it? Like I can dictate my hours and I can dictate like how much extra hours I want to work. And it's usually like somewhere in the middle in terms of those things. No employer will ever tell you like that they crunch outright. Like this is something that I always ask in interviews, and usually the answer is either like uh, we we may have crunched in the past when we needed to, but we don't now, or oh, we don't crunch at all. And generally, it's hard to get a feel of that from just interviewing with like a recruiter or like uh, different people in the studio. Because in terms of my own work-life balance, because I work from home, I am relatively free to choose my hours. So I work from like 8 to 4. And if I need to do something in between, I can be like, okay, I don't know, I'll take like an hour or two to go to the doctor or grab my uh, medicine from the pharmacy or something, and then put those 1 or 2 hours, put them on a different day. And like technically I'm working the same amount of time a week. And then some people would say like, oh, you should just, you know, take the like not even work that extra amount of time. But really it just comes down to the culture of your team, um, and how much work there is, because I believe most places don't really care as long as you get the work done, especially with work from home nowadays. But yeah, I think it's mostly dependent on the team. But for me personally, I've been fine.
All right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think the same type of question was asked to Janice Chu, who worked at, I believe, Blizzard. And she
Yeah.
had a very different experience. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along those lines of talking about the AAA experience. So hearing your experience in more like, would you consider it more like indie or like AA sort of for your studio?
Sort of, yeah. The other thing is that like, um, at bigger studios, it can just be accepted that we're close to release or we have to put this stuff out, gotta crunch a little. Um, and at the end of the day, none of that is like I would say none of that is like the person doing the work's fault. And usually it's more a problem of planning or management,
Mhm.
because like I wouldn't lie, if I had days where I'm just like in meetings half the day, but I still have to get work done and I feel it's kind of bleh. Um, but I wouldn't say that's like crunchy so much as like the planning was really bad. And then I get to talk about it with like my producer or something after.
Mhm. All right.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think this is pretty interesting, seeing like your experience, of course, and how it can be useful to hear it, obviously. So I think that's definitely like really cool to know.
The other thing is like what I've seen is sometimes some teams will be kind of short-staffed, and then uh it'll like I don't agree with it, but sometimes like because you have so little people that the conditions end up crunchy because you don't have the head count to actually put out the amount of work that's expected of your team, which again comes down to like the leadership and management and planning decisions. Any other
Very
questions?
interesting.
I got one for you, Diane.
Sure.
I guess, how do you like what you do now compared to what you used to do when you were still like learning and growing in GameSpawn? And do you like it more or less, or like, is it just like different?
Um, my favorite thing is that how do I say this? My favorite thing about like working in a professional setting now is that this is gonna sound bad, but I like that usually like I'm gonna be the dumbest person in the room, but that's good because it means that I'm always gonna have someone to learn from. Where like for as much as I love GameSpawn, I love making GameSpawn games. Uh, like it's kind of tough sometimes when you're the person that like people have to go to for questions, and then when you have questions, who do you ask? Uh, I mean Google exists, but like that sometimes you don't have people to ask the hard questions to. Yeah. Though I will say that like compared to GameSpawn, I end up working on like a relatively smaller fraction of the game. Like I'm working on individual like small things like, oh, I make this thing run like, I don't know, it, it 10 milliseconds fast, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot when you're doing it every like I don't know, 100 times a frame or something. Um, but I usually don't end up working on like big ticket stuff like like I did for like, oh, I did a bunch of Codename Null stuff, or I did a bunch of Echo and the Mirror stuff, or a bunch of Ocean's Demise stuff. Um, so it's harder to say like, oh, I worked on this individual like big thing, but I think I'm okay with the trade-off because it's a good learning experience.
That's very good to know. I get you. Man, if you guys have more questions, feel free to ask them. But we are like getting close to 450-ish, so it's 449. If you have more questions, please put them in soon, because we only have like 10 minutes left.
If anybody has any more like advice questions, like now is your time before I go off the rails.
Yes, Donovan has a lot of stuff lined up, so
Is there something you missed from GameSpawn that like doesn't exist in industry? I mean, a lot of things probably do, but like
me.
I mean, I do miss the people in GameSpot. Is there, is there anything specific? I mean, I don't think this is necessarily like specific to professional stuff kind of deal, but I do miss just like rolling up to the creator lab and like hanging out with people. But that's more of a
Sentiment.
COVID thing than like
Yeah.
a specifically industry thing, I feel. What else? I mean, the other thing is like I would have said like just being able to work on a thing without like having to check in with anybody. But what I found is that, especially with programmers, like basically everyone has a side project. So like uh, everyone has like a little pet game that they're working on. And it's always fun to see this. Yeah, I don't know. I say mostly the people.
You can come over anytime you want. Just hit me up.
All right. If that is the last professional question, here is my more off the rails questions. What's your favorite type of like game genre that you like, either like to play or like to program, like seeing your experience with GameSpawn?
See, like I feel like before I got a job, I would have said that roguelikes were my favorite genre. So like Hades kind of deal, Risk of Rain, Binding of Isaac. But like now that I have a job, I don't have time to grind those games anymore. So I'm like, uh, um, I'd say like those kind of things. I've always been a person that plays first-person shooters. Uh, that's it. I play some fighting games. I don't know. It's hard for me to like nail down a specific thing,
Mhm.
but something in that range.
Yeah, it's like a variety of games.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. For I guess even though you can't talk about specific games you worked on, do you have like a favorite genre to like programs, seeing like your history in GameSpawn, or something along those lines?
Yeah. I actually like all of the RPG stuff I made. Though partially it's fine because of like the tools I made, where I could like, I can make RPG tools and people can make RPGs with them. And it's like cool. I feel like if I had to choose something now, that's a good question. I want to make a first person shooter. I've never actually made a first person shooter.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I imagine it's going to be pretty interesting because I was just thinking the chaos of Battlefield 2042 in a flashback. But I imagine like it's going to be pretty interesting to see like what types of stuff can happen when you like switch genres for what you code in, and you can see like the similarities and differences to other types of games.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The other thing, now that you mentioned that, if you allow me to go off topic about something, is that like uh you would think that big budget stuff tends to be like well organized and coded or whatever, but I feel like there's just as much spaghetti in the like big studio space as there is like when you get down to like as small as something as like GameSpawn teams. It's just that the spaghetti is like more often than not, uh, someone wrote more of it and it works.
Yeah, I like that comparison to spaghetti. Yeah. I think it's always interesting how some games are, I don't know, it's always interesting seeing how like the game industry kind of evolves with time.
Yeah.
All right. I wonder if I have some more questions. So
Donovan, I have one.
yes. Oh, you have one?
Yeah, but it's a little off topic as well. What you've been playing recently?
Uh, I've been playing through, well, previously I played through like a bunch of Castlevania games. I did like the NES ones, which are, I'm not gonna say they were awful. They're like a game you play once and then never again.
I mean, I'm sure for its time, it was like
Yeah, they're cool.
fine. Yeah.
And then like once you like you get through it, you're like, oh, that was actually like a pretty satisfying experience. But I was also never do it again. Though I did play the Super Nintendo one, that was good. And I played the first like Metroidvania game, Symphony of the Night, and that was fun. Let's see. And then other games. I finished Control pretty recently. It's like how do I describe it? It's like if you know like the SCP like internet stuff. It's like if that was a game where like it's
Oh,
just
I don't know what
wacky
SCP
shit
is.
happens. Imagine like 60s conspiracy theories but made into a AAA game.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite game you worked on? Because that's what Evie's asking.
I feel like she's gonna roast no matter which one I choose. I don't know. I feel like I learned different things from all of them. I guess if I really had to choose, then uh, maybe Ocean's Demise, just because I worked on a lot of different things for that game. And it was fun.
Everything's a learning experience. Okay. Donovan, did you have anything more? Because we have like 2 minutes left.
Right. So another like off the rails question. Do you have any hobbies that you like outside of games? Obviously you really love games, but other things also that you enjoy that you would want to share with like members?
I mean, I used to cosplay and go to cons a lot, and then COVID happened.
COVID,
Uh,
yeah.
So that hasn't really been a thing for a while.
You guys missed out on Halloween, man. Should have been there.
That's it. Oh, I've been meaning to pick up more non-game hobbies. But I've just been busy like trying to get a job. So
Right. That's really cool.
I guess we could start wrapping it up since we do have other events after this, or at least we'll wrap up the recording. So thank you so much, Diane, for coming out and giving us your time to talk with us.
yeah.
Diane's in the server if you guys ever want to ask her anything in programming or in job applications, all those things. She's lurking. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming, and to those who are potentially watching the recording, thank you so much for watching.
Yeah.
Now stop it.